Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Imagine the U.S. president, right? He goes on national television and says, I told Israel not to strike this target.
Yeah, a very public directive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately, Israeli officials go straight to the press and say, well, actually, Washington was informed and gave us the green light.
Which is just a massive contradiction.
Right. And that isn't some hypothetical scenario we're
Yeah.
making up that actually happened. So today, we are unpacking the rapid real-time fracturing of the U.S.-Israel military coalition.
It's a really unprecedented situation.
It is. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us, you are the learner. You're someone who wants to look past, just the flashing breaking news alerts to truly understand the hidden mechanics of what is actually happening in the world.
And the mechanics we're looking at today are frankly incredibly complex. We are analyzing a very specific emerging rift regarding the ongoing war in Iran.
Yeah.
And we're using a stack of source material for this, but it's really anchored by this in-depth report from The Guardian titled Cracks in the Coalition.
Now, before we really get into it, I need to put a quick disclaimer out there.
Yeah.
We're looking at sources today that are incredibly politically charged. I mean, we're talking about Oval Office quotes, leaked intelligence on Iran and Israel, the whole 9 yards.
Right, it's sensitive stuff.
Extremely. So, to be totally clear, our job today is not to tell you who is right or, who to root for. We aren't taking sides here.
No, not at all.
And we aren't making any sort of moral judgments. Our only job is to take the facts, the quotes, the data from this source material and lay them all out on the table so you can see the actual architecture of this conflict for yourself.
Because that architecture is currently shaking. I mean, it is visibly trembling. We're looking at how a single localized military strike on a gas field has triggered just an absolute cascade of consequences.
Oh, total domino effect.
Exactly. We're talking open disputes between allied leaders, severe disruption of global energy supplies, and really high-profile resignations echoing through the halls of Washington.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the entire global fallout, we really have to start with the immediate trigger.
The spark that lit the fuse.
Right. According to the reporting, this whole cascade started with an Israeli strike on Iran's largest gas field, which is called South Pars. Now, just looking at the map, South Pars isn't just like an isolated Iranian asset.
No, not at all.
It's this massive geological formation that Iran physically shares with Qatar.
And that shared border changes the entire geopolitical calculus because, think about it. When you strike a resource that is physically tethered to a neighboring country,
you can't just contain the damage.
Right. You are no longer just engaging your primary target. You are instantly pulling a third party into the blast radius. And Qatar is a massive global energy player.
They're huge.
So hitting a shared underwater reservoir, it threatens the integrity of their extraction infrastructure as well. It's not just an attack on Iran at that point.
Which totally explains the immediate, almost chaotic aftermath of the strike and this just fascinating breakdown in communication between the U.S. and Israel.
Yeah, the public messaging was a mess.
It really was. So Donald Trump speaks from the Oval Office, claiming unequivocally that he knew absolutely nothing about this attack in advance.
Completely denying any prior knowledge.
Right. He states that he spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the strike, and his quote from this is quite direct. He says he told Netanyahu, quote, "Don't do that," and he won't do that.
Yeah, and he actually elaborated on the nature of their coordination, which was interesting. He added, quote, "We do independent, but get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore."
Wow.
It's a remarkable public statement from an American president regarding a close ally. He's basically attempting to assert this firm boundary, but entirely after the fact.
But then it escalates, right? It goes from the Oval Office straight to social media.
Of course it does.
Trump posts on Truth Social, and the rhetoric becomes incredibly conditional and really severe.
Yeah, he sets a very specific ultimatum.
Exactly. He demands that no more attacks will be made by Israel on South Pars unless Iran unwisely decides to attack Qatar.
Bringing that third party right back into the mix.
Yep. And if Iran does that, Trump threatens that the U.S. would, and this is a quote, massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars gas field at an amount of strength and power that Iran has never seen before.
Notice the rhetorical maneuver there, though. The U.S. president is publicly distancing himself from the initial Israeli strike.
Right, washing his hands of it.
Yeah, setting a brand new red line involving that third-party nation, Qatar, and then threatening unprecedented unilateral American force if that red line is crossed.
It's like he's trying to rewrite the rules of engagement in real time.
Exactly. It's an attempt to regain control of the narrative and deter further escalation around what is essentially a critical global energy hub.
But Israeli officials push back. They don't just take it. They speak to both U.S. and Israeli media and directly dispute Trump's claim of ignorance.
They completely contradict the Oval Office.
Yeah. They state that Washington was, in fact, informed of the South Pars gas field attack before it actually took place.
It's a huge claim.
I mean, it feels like a high-stakes group project, you know?
Yeah.
Like where one partner goes completely off script, submits a totally separate assignment to the teacher, but then aggressively claims they CC'd you on the email beforehand.
That's a great way to put it. And what we're observing here isn't just a simple miscommunication. I mean, it is a public contradiction over accountability.
Right.
When allies openly dispute who authorized what and who knew what when, it signals to adversaries and other allies, honestly, that the coalition is not operating with a unified command structure.
It looks messy.
It projects massive vulnerability on the global stage.
So if the U.S. and Israel are openly arguing like this about a single gas field strike, it really forces us to ask, are they even fighting the same war?
Well, the friction over the South Pars strike is merely a symptom. It's the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, so what's underneath?
The underlying issue is that the United States and Israel are operating with fundamentally different definitions of victory.
And we get a very clear picture of these diverging playbooks from some testimony delivered to the House Intelligence Committee.
Yeah, by Tulsi Gabbard.
Right, the Director of National Intelligence. Gabbard explicitly lays out the contrasting objectives here. According to her testimony, the U.S. president's goal is strictly focused on containment.
Just degrading specific assets.
Exactly. The U.S. wants to destroy Iran's ballistic missile launching capability, their ballistic missile production capability, and their Navy. That's it.
But on the other side of the coalition, the objectives shift dramatically.
It's night and day.
Gabbard states that through their operations, the Israeli government has been focused on disabling the Iranian leadership. I mean, Israel is openly pushing for regime change.
Which brings up a massive piece of context regarding the nuclear threat. Right. Because Netanyahu has publicly asserted that thanks to joint efforts, Iran can no longer enrich uranium or make ballistic missiles.
Yeah, he made that claim very publicly.
And Gabbard's testimony actually corroborates the nuclear aspect, specifically regarding a mission from the previous year called Operation Midnight Hammer.
Right, a huge operation.
She states that as a result of Midnight Hammer, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was, quote, obliterated, and there have been no efforts since then to rebuild their enrichment capability.
It is a profound revelation when you think about it. It establishes that a major existential objective neutralizing the nuclear enrichment program was allegedly achieved a year prior.
Right.
The primary catalyst for international concern over Iran has, according to the Director of National Intelligence herself, been removed from the board entirely.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least ask the question that just immediately jumps out at me when I read this.
Go for it.
If Operation Midnight Hammer already neutralized the nuclear enrichment threat last year, what is the strategic justification for expanding the target list now?
Right. Why keep pushing?
Especially if it completely misaligns with the U.S. president's stated objectives of just targeting missiles and the Navy.
Yeah.
I mean, why escalate if the biggest piece on the board is already gone?
What's fascinating here is how differing goals inevitably lead to mission creep.
Mission creep. Yeah.
For the U.S., according to Gabbard's testimony, victory looks like containment. It looks like stripping away the specific military capabilities like the missiles and naval power that threaten the immediate region.
Put them in a box, basically.
Exactly. But for Israel, by shifting focus toward regime change and disabling leadership, they're indicating that mere containment is insufficient. They're aiming for a structural overhaul of the adversary.
I want to flip the table.
Right. And when you have one ally fighting for containment and another fighting for regime change, you are eventually going to clash over which targets are acceptable to hit.
And that clash over targets is exactly what takes us out of the committee room and into global markets.
To real-world consequences.
Yeah. Because Israel's shift in strategy hasn't just been about targeting leadership. It has involved bombing civilian infrastructure.
Which crosses a major line. The reporting details that while the U.S. focused on the military complex, Israel carried out targeted assassinations and bombed civilian infrastructure, including oil depots in Tehran.
which immediately sparked severe ecological concerns.
Huge fires, pollution, yeah.
And those strikes on civilian infrastructure, they prompt Iran to launch retaliatory attacks. But they don't just hit back at Israel. They target Gulf energy infrastructure.
Expanding the map.
Exactly. They hit Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, and they hit Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, especially for anyone looking at how global economics are tied directly to physical geography.
Geography is everything here.
It is. The Samref refinery is located near the Red Sea port of Yanbu. Now, why is that specific port so important right now? Because according to our sources, the Strait of Hormuz is currently closed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the map. The Strait of Hormuz is the only sea passage from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean.
It's a massive bottleneck.
It is the main artery for Middle Eastern oil, period. When that artery closes, all of that oil has to find another way out.
It can't just sit there.
Right. So Saudi Arabia is forced to pump its crude overland through pipelines across the entire Arabian Peninsula to the Red Sea coast. That makes the port of Yanbu their only outlet for crude exports.
Think of the global energy grid less like a pool of water and more like a massive, high-tension spider web.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. So the Strait of Hormuz is the main anchor thread. If you snip it, the tension doesn't just disappear. It violently snaps back and shifts all the way to a tiny side thread. In this case, the Yanbu port. So when Iran strikes the Samref refinery in Yanbu, they aren't just hitting a single Saudi facility. They're hitting the single point of failure for the entire rerouted Saudi oil supply.
It's a strategic masterstroke in a terrifying way. Furthermore, these retaliatory strikes on natural gas processing facilities, particularly Qatar's Ras Laffan, directly disrupt the supply of LNG to economies all over the world.
Liquefied natural gas.
Right. And Asian markets are uniquely vulnerable to this because they rely heavily on steady LNG shipments just to power their grid.
To keep the lights on.
Literally, you make a localized tactical strike in the Middle East, and suddenly manufacturing hubs in Asia are facing immediate energy shortages.
And the anger from U.S. allies over this economic disruption is becoming palpable. I mean, we have a direct quote from the foreign minister of Oman, Badr al-Busaidi.
He did not hold back.
Not at all. He wrote, quote, "The American administration's greatest miscalculation, of course, was allowing itself to be drawn into this war in the first place." And he explicitly states, quote, "This is not America's war, and there is no likely scenario in which both Israel and America will get what they want from it."
That is a stunning public rebuke from a regional ally.
You don't see that every day.
No, you really don't. It reflects this growing perception among Gulf states that Washington's foreign policies is being dictated by Netanyahu's government rather than U.S. strategic interests.
The tail wagging the dog.
Exactly, and that the resulting instability is directly hurting America's partners.
Now, Netanyahu completely dismisses that narrative. When he was asked about dragging the U.S. into the conflict, he tells reporters, quote, "Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do?"
Which is a classic rhetorical deflection.
Classic.
But it doesn't erase the reality that the U.S. administration is taking the heat globally for strikes they claim they didn't even authorize.
And that heat isn't just coming from the Gulf states. The geopolitical pressure, the economic disruptions, the diverging military goals, all of this external stress is now causing the architecture of the U.S. administration to fracture internally.
The calls are coming from inside the House now.
The ripple effect has totally reached Washington. The anger over this war has led to a very prominent defection. Joe Kent, the former director of the United States National Counterterrorism Center, resigns from his post.
A huge deal.
And Kent is notably an ally of Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence we discussed earlier.
The resignation of a National Counterterrorism Center director during an ongoing conflict is not a minor administrative shuffle.
No.
It is a massive flashing warning light on the dashboard of the administration.
And his resignation statement is incredibly blunt. He writes, quote, "I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran." He states that Iran, quote, "pose no imminent threat to our nation."
That phrase right there is huge.
No imminent threat.
Yeah.
And then he makes a direct accusation regarding the origin of the conflict, stating, quote, "It is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby."
Those words, no imminent threat, and pointing directly to Allied lobbying pressure, I mean, they strike at the very foundation of the war's justification to the American public.
So what does this all mean? How does an administration maintain any kind of unified front when you have the Director of National Intelligence testifying that the U.S. and Israel have totally different war goals?
Right.
And you have the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center publicly resigning and claiming the war was started due to lobbyist pressure.
This raises an important question about the sustainability of wartime policy when domestic consensus just collapses.
How do you keep the war going?
You might not be able to. A unified front relies on the illusion of absolute certainty. Kent's resignation shatters that illusion.
It pulls back the curtain.
When internal administrative dissent becomes public, especially from counterterrorism leadership, it forces the administration to fight a two-front political battle.
Right, one abroad and one at home.
Exactly. One front managing an unpredictable ally in the Middle East, and the other front managing collapsing political support at home.
It's incredible how fast we traveled from a single airstrike on a gas field to a potential collapse in domestic political support.
It all happens so fast.
It did. And for you, the learner, this has been a journey through the hidden machinery of global conflict. What began in the headlines as just a dispute over who knew what about an attack on the South Tars gas field.
Which seemed like just a diplomatic spat at first.
Right. But it actually revealed a massive ideological gap in what the U.S. and Israel consider a quote-unquote victory.
And we saw how that gap led to shifts in targeting, right? Moving from strictly military sites to civilian infrastructure.
Yeah.
That shift exposed the fragile nature of our global energy markets, how the closure of the Strait of Hormuz turns a single Red Sea port like Yanbu into a critical vulnerability for the entire world's energy supply.
Ultimately, we saw how those international ripples crashed right back onto the shores of Washington, creating intense internal fractures and high-profile resignations.
It all connects.
It does. And understanding this layered complexity is exactly why we do this. It helps you look right past the simplified daily headlines. You now understand how a closed strait, a shared gas reserve, and competing domestic political pressures all pull on the exact same geopolitical thread.
As we wrap up our analysis of these sources, I want to leave you with one final intriguing question to ponder on your own.
Okay, let's hear it.
We talked about how the South Pars gas field is physically shared by two nations, Iran and Qatar.
Right.
A strike on one half of it immediately threatened the entire global LNG supply chain. Given that reality, how might modern warfare force the world to fundamentally rethink how and where we centralize the critical energy resources our global economy relies on?
That's a huge question.
If a shared border means a shared target, can the current energy grid survive the wars of the future?
Wow. It really makes you realize that in the modern world, there is no such thing as an isolated event. You pull one thread, and the whole web shakes. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.